A wolf soulmate romance written by Clara Nightshade. Prologue. When the world ends, what do you have left to live for? Quinn Mercer has survived the unthinkable. Paraplegic, bitter, and barricaded inside the husk of a ruined city, he's made peace with loneliness until a wounded silver wolf crashes into his shelter, bleeding and broken. But the creature is no ordinary beast. She is Elira Thorne, half woman, half weapon, born from a lab's twisted ambition and hunted by the very people who made her. She should terrify him. But instead, she protects him. As their bond deepens, so does the danger. Elira's biology is tied to a mutating ecosystem, one that's awakening beneath the soil, speaking in vines and thorns, choosing Quinn as its voice. And while the world above burns in fear of the infected, something ancient is rising beneath the ruins. Some monsters were built to kill. Others were built to love. But love, in a world like this, might be the most dangerous mutation of all. When Monsters Love is a romantic post-apocalyptic novel about survival, monstrosity, devotion, and the quiet power of choosing love when the world demands violence. Chapter 1. The Wolf Beneath the Ash. The world had rotted. Not just the bones of cities or the skin of the sky, but the marrow of civilization itself. Quinn Mercer sat in the hushed stillness of his barricaded apartment, the wind outside keening through the hollowed-out ruins like a dirge. From his rust-stained wheelchair, he watched the flicker of a candle gutter against the soot-darkened window. Another nightfall. Another breath in a world that had long stopped offering mercy. His legs, useless, thin things beneath the threadbare blanket, ached dully with ghost sensations. He ignored them. Pain was a luxury. Movement was memory. He gripped the pistol in his lap more tightly when the howls started. Not human. Not quite animal, either. The slow ones didn't howl like that, and Tier 2s didn't warn before they attacked. But this was no zombie's cry, it held agony. Hunger. Wildness too sharp to be mindless. Quinn reached behind him, checking the length of pipe bolted across the door. Reinforced. Fortified. Safe. That was the word he whispered to himself each night, as if saying it could make it true. Safe. The howl came again. Closer. Then, a crash. Not at the door. From above. Quinn jerked the wheelchair around, heart slamming into his ribs as something massive thudded through the ceiling. Dust rained down. The groan of strained wood. And then, the ceiling split open like old bread, a shape falling with a wet, heavy sound into the darkened apartment. He didn't scream. He never screamed. Just lifted the pistol and trained it on the figure. It moved. A tangle of fur, blood, limbs. A wolf, massive, silver-coated, its flank scored with gashes oozing thick, black ichor. Its breath rattled. It tried to stand, but one paw curled under uselessly. Then it collapsed again with a grunt, eyes flashing faint amber in the gloom. Quinn didn't fire. Not yet. The wolf didn't lunge. Didn't snarl. It watched him with a staggering kind of recognition, as though memorizing the angles of his face. Mutant. Quinn rasped, more to himself than the beast. No answer. Of course not. But his heart wouldn't stop racing. His world was already broken. Monsters weren't new. But this one bled. It trembled. And its eyes weren't empty. They were pleading. The pistol dipped. Something in him, something that hadn't been touched since his brother left him to die, tugged in his chest like a thread winding taut. He lowered the gun completely. Stay there, he said quietly. He backed up, slowly, carefully, and wheeled into the adjoining kitchen. Bottled water. Gauze. What little painkillers he still had. A basin. He didn't know what he was doing. Only that the wolf hadn't killed him. Only that it was dying. He returned to find the creature had dragged itself closer, though it trembled violently with each breath. It bled from its shoulder and side, flesh torn deep, too deep for a regular beast to survive. Quinn knelt with difficulty, his legs dragging like dead weights, and pressed a cloth to the worst of the wounds. The wolf flinched. Growled low. "Don't bite me and I won't shoot you," he muttered. The growl faded. It let him touch it. As he worked, his mind churned through fragments of old reports. Rumors of gifted mutations. Crossbreeds. Experimental chimeras. Things born not just from viral plague but from science drunk on its own power. Could this be one of those? He cleaned the wounds as best he could. Wrapped what he could reach. The wolf panted, its breath slow and shallow. "You'll die without help," he said, voice rough. "And I don't have a vet clinic." The wolf's ear twitched. "You understand me, don't you?" His eyes narrowed. It didn't nod. But it didn't deny him either. He leaned back against the nearest wall, exhausted. The candle sputtered and finally died. Darkness swallowed the room. And then came the sound. Bones breaking. Not cracking, reshaping. Muscle warping, joints rearranging. A wet, awful sound that slithered through the dark. Quinn's fingers scrambled for the pistol again. Found it. Too late. A figure was rising in front of him, bathed in starlight through the broken ceiling. A woman. Pale, naked, streaked with blood and grime, silver hair falling past her bare shoulders. Her eyes were the same. Amber. Wolf eyes. Quinn couldn't breathe. "I won't hurt you," she said. Her voice was low. Rough with exhaustion, but unmistakably human. "You helped me." His heart thundered. "What are you?" She stepped forward slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. Her legs buckled once, and she caught herself on the wall. Her ribs were bruised, skin slashed raw and already trying to close. "I'm yours," she whispered. The silence between them thickened, oppressive and strange, as Quinn sat frozen in his chair and stared at the impossible vision before him. His breath, shallow and unsure, mingled with the damp rot of the ruined room, the scent of scorched wood and rusted iron giving way to something subtler, an earthy musk with the barest undercurrent of wildflowers and ash. It came from her. The woman, whoever, whatever she was, did not shrink from his gaze. Despite the rawness of her wounds and the tremble in her legs, she stood with an uncanny stillness, like a wolf pausing between attack and retreat. Her amber eyes met his, not with the blank innocence of a victim or the snarling hunger of the infected, but with something deeper. Something ancient. Unfolding. "I'm yours," she had said. Quinn exhaled slowly, grounding himself against the frayed armrest beneath his fingers. "That's a hell of a thing to say to someone holding a gun." Her gaze dropped, but only briefly. "You didn't shoot." He couldn't argue with that. His mind raced to catalogue the moment, to classify it, to fit her into some rational framework. Gifted. A hybrid. Some freak product of the Netherspire labs, like the rumors whispered in smoke-filled corners of survivor bars, chimeras, forged in steel and needle? But beneath the theories, a colder truth pricked at him. It didn't matter what she was. She could have killed him when she was stronger. She hadn't. And now? Now she was bleeding, vulnerable, and standing in his ruined living room with the grace of a wounded goddess. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice a rasp softened by reluctant curiosity. "Elira," she said. "Elira Thorne." He repeated it in his mind, tasting the shape of it. Elira. Not a name conjured by madness. Not some coded lab term or mutated designation. It was human. "I'm Quinn. Quinn Mercer." She took a cautious step toward him. When he didn't move, she crossed the room, barefoot on the cracked floor, until she stood just beside his chair. The proximity sent a shiver crawling up his spine. She smelled not just of wildness but of blood, sweat, and the rain-soaked earth. Her body was bruised and raw, but still warm with life. Fragile. Real. "May I sit?" she asked. He nodded, slow and measured. Elira lowered herself to the floor beside him, resting her back against the wall with a faint wince. Her body moved like someone unused to this form or perhaps, too familiar with pain. She wrapped her arms loosely around her knees, posture defensive but not fearful. "I didn't mean to crash into your shelter," she said quietly. "I was being hunted. One of the Tier 2s tracked me across the rooftops. I lost my footing when I changed mid-jump." "You were shifting while fighting?" She nodded, her gaze steady. "It's hard to hold the form when wounded. My instincts fracture." He studied her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the delicate smudge of dirt along her cheek, the way her hair clung to her neck in damp tangles. There was an animal quality to her even now, but it wasn't monstrous. It was tragic. I've never seen one of your kind before, he said. There aren't many of us left, she replied, her voice distant. And most who survive don't make friends with humans. A dry laugh escaped him, brittle as glass. I'm not exactly thriving myself. Her eyes flicked to his legs beneath the blanket. What happened? Quinn hesitated. The story tasted bitter in his mouth, even now. A raid. 6 years ago. Julian, my brother, ran. Left me behind. A tier 2 crushed the building we were hiding in. Pinned me under rubble. I crawled for hours. Lost the use of everything below the waist. Elira didn't apologize. She didn't offer pity. Only silence, deep and respectful. And that, more than any empty words, eased something tight in Quinn's chest. You've survived alone this long, she asked softly. I don't need anyone. She tilted her head, lips barely curled. And yet, here I am. Still breathing. That was the first time he almost smiled. A sudden thud outside the door sent both of them tensing. Quinn reached instinctively for the pistol on his lap. Elira didn't move, but her pupils flared wide, nostrils flaring. Slow, she whispered. Feral. But not alone. Zombies. He cursed under his breath, wheeling back slightly to check the door. Shadows moved just beyond the frosted glass. One slow, dragging gait. Then another. Then more. Elira rose swiftly, silent on her feet, and positioned herself between the door and Quinn without hesitation. Her body still bore wounds, still trembled from earlier strain, but her stance was solid. She didn't look at him when she said, if they breach, I'll change again. He swallowed. You'll burn out your strength. You need to rest. Her voice was low. I don't care. The pounding grew louder. Quinn could hear the wet snarls now, the slap of palms against the doorframe, the shriek of decayed throats that had forgotten language. They were testing the barricade. Elira crouched, her hands splayed against the floor. Her muscles rippled with restrained fury, skin already rippling with hints of silver fur. Wait, he said. They haven't broken through yet. Let me try something. Her head whipped toward him, confused, but he was already wheeling himself toward the window, dragging his hand across the glass. In one sharp motion, he sliced his palm open on the jagged edge. The blood hit the floor. The zombies reacted instantly, growling and scratching at the walls, drawn by the scent. Quinn turned to Elira, holding out the bleeding hand. Open the vent. Let the smell draw them down the alley. If we're lucky, they'll follow it and lose interest. She hesitated, then nodded. A moment later, the grating was off, and the scent of blood drifted into the darkness beyond the ruined walls. It took time, tense, grinding minutes, but eventually the scratching slowed. The groans faded. And then, silence returned. Elira exhaled slowly and turned toward him. That was dangerous. He shrugged. So is everything. Without asking, she knelt beside him and took his bleeding hand. Her fingers were warm and sure as she wrapped a strip of cloth from her own torn shirt around the wound. You bled for me, she said. No, he muttered. I bled for both of us. Her eyes met his again, filled not with gratitude but something heavier. Something almost reverent. And once again, that strange thread pulled tight between them. Chapter 2, The Ash Beneath Our Skin. Morning came slow and sallow, bleeding through cracks in the boarded windows like an accusation. Ash drifted on the stale air, soft and relentless, settling in the corners of Quinn's apartment as if it had always belonged there. The world outside groaned with a waking hunger, distant but familiar, the shuffle of rotted feet, the dull moans that echoed between hollowed buildings, the shriek of birds who had long since learned to feed on flesh. Inside, the apartment was silent. Elira slept curled on a salvaged cot near the back wall, wrapped in a threadbare blanket Quinn had once reserved for winter emergencies. Her breathing was shallow, though steady now, and her face had lost the pinched strain it wore the night before. The wounds across her side were still visible beneath the blanket, but they no longer seeped dark blood. Instead, new skin, pale and uneven, was already knitting itself together at a speed that defied natural healing. Quinn watched her from his chair, his left hand wrapped in a blood-stained cloth. He hadn't slept. Something about the sight of her unsettled him, not fear, exactly, but unease threaded through curiosity. She was human now, undeniably. Her face bore the softness of someone too young to be this broken. But when she stirred in her sleep, he caught glimpses of something deeper, something primal twitching beneath the skin, like muscle memory laced with violence. She was beautiful. Not in the way of magazine covers or pre-plague cinema, but in the way lightning was beautiful, raw, dangerous, utterly indifferent to being admired. He hated that he noticed. He hated, even more, that part of him wanted her to wake up just so she would look at him again. Quinn turned away from her and wheeled himself to the small metal shelf where he kept his dwindling supplies. 1 can of beans. 2 cracked lighters. Half a pack of filtered water tabs. He made a quick calculation in his head, 3 days, if he rationed carefully. 2, if he fed her too. You're not built for this, he muttered to himself. You need someone strong. Whole. I don't want someone whole, a voice rasped behind him, still thick with sleep. They wouldn't need me. He turned slowly. Elira sat upright on the cot, her blanket slipping off one shoulder. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, those impossible amber eyes, were sharp with understanding. You were awake, he asked. Long enough. He said nothing for a moment, only studied her again in full morning light. Without blood and shadow to blur her features, she looked eerily untouched by the world around them. Her face was free of scars, but not of sorrow. She wore it in the quiet lines of her mouth, the slight tension in her brow, the wary way she held his gaze as if bracing for rejection even now. You heard what I said. She nodded once. You think you're broken. Aren't I? No, she said, voice low. Just hurt in ways you've learned to live with. He didn't respond. There was no room in him for easy acceptance. Not anymore. Instead, he turned back to the shelf, selecting one of the water tabs and a dented flask. He filled it slowly from the catchment bucket beneath the leaking ceiling, then handed it to her without ceremony. She took it gently, fingers brushing his for a breath too long. Thank you, she said, her voice gentled now by something softer than gratitude. For not turning me away. I should've, he muttered. Any sane person would have. Then I'm lucky you're not entirely sane. That earned a flicker of something in him, a tug at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but a loosening. A crack in the armor. She drank in small sips, eyes never leaving him. When she finally set the flask down, she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something deeper than sound. You didn't ask how I can shift. I figured you'd tell me when you're ready. That surprised her. Most people ask immediately. Or run. I can't run, he said dryly, gesturing to the chair beneath him. And I've met enough monsters to know they don't always look like wolves. Her gaze darkened, not with offense, but a kind of solemn appreciation. She nodded, slow. My father made me this way. Not by blood. By design. Quinn said nothing. I was part of a breeding experiment. One of the gifted strains merged with something wilder. Something born from the virus, but shaped by intention. They called me Subject 7. Where? Netherspire. Before it burned. He remembered the name. Everyone did. It was a ghost story survivors passed in shivering tones, a place where scientists had tried to save humanity by unraveling its soul. How did you escape? I didn't. Not really. They let me go when I started killing the other test subjects. Her voice didn't tremble. They wanted to see how far I'd go before I lost myself. Quinn absorbed the words like cold water down his spine. And did you? Elira looked at him, and in her silence, he saw both a confession and a plea. I don't know, she admitted. The room felt smaller suddenly, filled with truths that neither of them could undo. But still, she didn't look away from him. And neither did he. Outside, the wind picked up again, sending tendrils of ash swirling past the broken windowpane like grey snowfall. The world remained ruined and waiting, but inside this room, 2 people, 2 damaged, haunted things sat together in fragile understanding. Elira drew the blanket around herself and leaned back against the cot's edge. I want to stay, she said softly, her words more breath than declaration. If you'll let me. Quinn stared at her, caught between suspicion and the aching part of himself that still believed in belonging. You shouldn't want to, he said after a long pause. Her eyes didn't waver. But I do. The decision to leave the apartment came not with drama or grand gestures, but with the quiet inevitability of survival. Supplies were too low. The barricade, though reinforced, had been tested too many times. And worst of all, the scent of blood lingered in the cracks of the floorboards, calling to the ferals like a dinner bell rung too long. Quinn knew the signs. He'd seen it before: safe houses turned graveyards because someone stayed a day too long, clinging to a semblance of comfort that had no place in this world. So, when Elira stood at dawn beside the shattered ceiling, her body already healing, her eyes clear despite the shadows beneath them, he didn't argue. They packed in silence. There wasn't much to carry, only the essentials: water tabs, a pocket blade, the cracked flask, a rusted compass with a jittery needle, and a weather-worn map of Ashfall and its broken arteries. Quinn had memorized most of it already, but maps were safer than memory, and he didn't trust anything that bled. Elira offered to carry him. He declined. Instead, he strapped himself into the makeshift motorized rig he'd built months ago, part wheelchair, part hand-cranked crawler, salvaged from the remains of a delivery bot and his own stubborn pride. The gears groaned when he moved, but the wheels held. With Elira scouting ahead and clearing debris when needed, they would make it. They had to. As they emerged into the hushed skeleton of the street, Quinn blinked against the cold sunlight, sharp and unfiltered. The world stretched before them like a carcass: rows of collapsed buildings, jagged spires of concrete strangled by vines, rusting cars overturned and split open like gutted animals. Trees, mutated things with bark like charred skin and leaves that bled sap, grew wild between cracks in the asphalt. Ash still fell, as it always did. Light as snow. Bitter as loss. Elira walked with the easy caution of a predator who understood territory. Her steps were soundless, her nostrils flaring with every gust of wind. Once, she crouched near a twisted heap of metal and signaled for Quinn to stop. He obeyed without question. Moments later, a Tier 1 emerged from behind the rubble, its rotted flesh dragging across the concrete, jaw slack, tongue blackened and swollen. It didn't see them. Elira didn't let it. With a smooth, terrifying grace, she moved behind it, slid her blade beneath its skull, and pulled. It collapsed without a sound. When she returned, wiping her blade on the hem of her stolen pants, Quinn didn't flinch. But he did meet her gaze. "You've done that before," he said. "Too many times," she replied simply. They moved east, away from the city's center and toward the forgotten stretch between Ashfall and Ridgegate, an expanse once called the Maya Quarter, now known simply as the Hollows. It was a place most avoided. Overgrown. Haunting. But it was where Quinn remembered an old supply drop bunker, abandoned after the first collapse. If it hadn't been scavenged, it might still hold water, food, maybe even medical gear. Hours passed in tense silence. Eventually, the rig's battery began to whine, a high, pitiful sound like a wounded animal. Quinn sighed and pulled the emergency crank from the side, locking the wheels so he could turn them manually. Elira came to his side immediately. "Let me. I can do it." She hesitated. "It'll exhaust you." He didn't look at her as he replied, "Better to crawl than be carried." There was no judgment in her voice when she said, "You're allowed to need help, Quinn. And you're allowed to leave me behind if I slow you down." She stopped walking. He kept turning the crank until her shadow loomed directly over him, tall and still. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her tone quiet but anchored. "I wasn't lying last night." Quinn's hands stilled on the crank. "You're mine. And I'm yours." The words lodged somewhere in his chest, not like a knife, but something stranger, something warm and aching. He didn't know what to do with that kind of certainty, especially not from someone who had torn a zombie's head off without blinking. But it didn't feel like manipulation. Not yet. They reached the Hollows by nightfall. The ruins there were different, less scorched by fire and more overgrown, as if nature had taken back what humanity had once built. Creepers climbed the remnants of skyscrapers like veins, pulsing faintly with bioluminescence. The air smelled of mildew and decay, but beneath it, there was the subtle perfume of something floral, faint, ghostly, and out of place. Elira moved more cautiously now. "There's something wrong with the ground," she murmured. "It's too soft." Quinn glanced around. You're thinking mutated flora? She nodded, already drawing her blade. Possibly spore grass. Or leech vine. He shuddered. Leech vine had taken an entire convoy last year, twisting around ankles and throats with barbed tendrils that latched into arteries and drank until nothing but husks remained. They pressed on, skirting the edges of cracked pavement where the vines thickened. Finally, they reached the entrance to the old bunker. It was sunken beneath a mound of collapsed concrete and tangled ivy, the steel door barely visible. Quinn moved toward it, fingers shaking slightly with anticipation, but Elira stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Let me check first. He watched as she crouched, sniffed the air, and pressed her palm to the steel. Her skin prickled instantly. She hissed and drew her hand back, revealing a burn thin, red, and steaming. Booby trapped? He asked. She shook her head, breathless. Warded. Warded? Quinn frowned. As in? Gifted maid? Elira nodded, her eyes narrowing. Someone's still using this place. Before he could speak, a low mechanical whir echoed from the shadows behind them. Quinn spun his chair, reaching for his pistol. Elira had already stepped between him and the sound, crouched low. From the darkness, a voice called out. Well, well. If it isn't the Mercer boy. Thought you'd be dead by now. The voice was laced with amusement and something darker. Quinn felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that voice. Elira, he said slowly, his hand tightening around the grip of his weapon. Stay close. The figure stepped into the moonlight. Tall. Lean. Dressed in scavenged armor and grinning like a wolf. Hello, little brother, Julian Mercer said. Miss me? Chapter 3, Blood in the Hollows. For a long, breathless moment, the world seemed to contract around the sound of Julian's voice. The scent of mildew, the pale gleam of bioluminescent vines, the distant moans of the infected beyond the ruins, all of it receded until only the space between Quinn and his brother remained, thick with memory and betrayal. Julian stood beneath the twisted arch of ivy and rebar, one boot propped against a chunk of concrete, his rifle slung casually across his shoulder as though they were meeting for drinks instead of colliding in the middle of a corpse-ridden hellscape. The smirk on his face hadn't changed, nor had the confident ease with which he claimed the space around him, like a wolf returned to familiar ground. I almost didn't recognize you, he said, voice light with mockery. Thought maybe the wasteland would have eaten you alive by now. Guess some things really do refuse to die. Quinn's fingers curled tightly around the wheel rims of his chair, the ghost pain in his legs forgotten beneath the weight of rising fury. He felt Elira shift beside him, her body tense, protective, like a drawn bow. I should be dead, Quinn said, his voice low, restrained. You made sure of that. Julian clicked his tongue and shrugged with exaggerated indifference. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. I panicked. We were surrounded. I thought you were gone. You ran, Quinn said, his voice sharpened by years of silence, years of broken trust. You didn't even look back. Julian's smile faltered, but only for a second. Well, clearly you managed. Looks like you even found yourself a pet. Elira moved before Quinn could react. One step forward, predatory and silent, and Julian instinctively reached for his sidearm. She stopped just short of striking distance, her eyes aglow with warning. Call me that again, she said softly, and I'll show you what's left of your throat. Julian studied her, not with fear, but with interest, like someone appraising an exotic weapon. Gifted? He asked, cocking his head. Elira didn't answer. Quinn spoke instead. She's not your business. That depends, Julian said, gaze sliding back to his brother. Because if you're planning to open that bunker, then I'd say we've got overlapping interests. I didn't know you had interests that didn't involve running away. The smirk returned, brittle at the edges now. I'm not that boy anymore, Quinn. Life out here taught me a few things. Like how to survive. How to lead. I've got people now. Contacts. You'd be smart to listen. Quinn narrowed his eyes. You've got a gang, not a cause. And you've never had loyalty. Not to anyone. Julian stepped forward, arms open in false appeal. Look around you, little brother. This place is crawling with things that were never meant to exist. The infected are evolving. The flora's gone feral. There's talk of a zombie king moving east toward Ridgegate. You want to stay alive? You'll need more than sharp words and a half-wolf bodyguard. You have 5 seconds, Elira said, her voice low and measured, to stop calling me things you don't understand. Julian laughed, but there was no warmth in it. She's protective. That's cute. He adjusted his stance, now more guarded. Fine. I'll play it straight. That bunker's warded because someone powerful is using it. Someone I intend to meet. If we pool resources, we might just get past the wards and share what's inside. You want to keep playing lone wolf, fine. But don't come crying when your battery dies and your girlfriend's torn apart by spores. Your offer's noted, Quinn said, his tone flat. And rejected. Julian's eyes hardened. You sure about that? Elira took another step forward, the light catching in her hair as her expression turned predatory. Try and take the bunker, and I will kill you. Slowly. Julian met her gaze with something between amusement and calculation. Then he tipped an invisible hat toward her, all mockery. Message received, he said. You always did pick the violent ones, Quinn. With that, he turned and vanished into the hollows, footsteps swallowed by the ivy-strewn path behind him. Quinn exhaled only once Julian was out of sight, though his hands still gripped the wheels tightly. Elira remained alert for a full minute before she relaxed, tension draining from her shoulders like evaporated rain. She knelt beside him, eyes searching his face. Are you all right? I don't know, he admitted. That was the first time I've seen him since the raid. Would you kill him? The question startled him not because it was blunt, but because he didn't know the answer. I don't know, he said again. Elira studied him for a long, quiet moment, then nodded as if that answer satisfied her. He'll be back. I know. She stood and moved to the bunker's sealed entrance, inspecting the faint symbols burned into the steel, strange, jagged shapes that shimmered slightly in the gloom. Wards like these need energy to stay active, she murmured. He's right about one thing. Someone's using this place. Quinn wheeled himself closer. Can we get through? Not without burning me. She held up her hand where the ward had scorched her skin. But I can try again tonight. The ambient energy lowers after dusk. The barrier might weaken. Assuming the trap doesn't kill you first. Her smile was small and strange. Then I hope you'd mourn me. I'd do more than that, he said before he could stop himself. She turned to him slowly, the wind stirring her silver hair around her face. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, she said, I don't want you to need me because I'm useful. I want you to choose me because you see me. I see too much, he replied. And for once, she didn't look away. Night settled like a bruise over the hollows, staining the ruins in hues of deep indigo and copper ash. The wind fell still, and the silence that followed was too perfect to be natural. Even the usual groans and wet murmurs of the ferals had gone quiet, as if something greater prowled nearby, just beyond the edges of perception. It was the kind of quiet that warned predators to stay hidden and survivors to keep their weapons within reach. Quinn sat with his back to a wall of weathered concrete, the bunker entrance several feet away and still pulsing faintly with ward light. His hands were sore from the cranking, and his chest ached from holding his breath far too often. Elira sat nearby, cross-legged on a flattened patch of moss-slick stone, sharpening her blade with a whetstone she carried in a salvaged pouch. Sparks caught in the pale strands of her hair with each drag of steel, flickering like fireflies. He watched her for a time, not speaking. She didn't look up, but she knew. Julian unsettles you, she said quietly, as though commenting on the temperature. He should, Quinn replied, his voice low and worn. There's no one in the world who knows how to hurt me better. Elira placed the blade aside, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. And yet you didn't shoot him. I'm not the kind of man who pulls the trigger just because he can. You might have to be, she said gently, if he makes a habit of returning. A pause stretched between them. Not awkward, but thick with thought. Then, she shifted, her posture less coiled now, more fluid. Her skin glistened faintly with sweat, and her breathing had changed. Quinn noticed it first in the way her nostrils flared occasionally, as if catching scents on the air invisible to him. Her pupils had dilated more than necessary for the dim light, and her jaw tensed every so often, like someone enduring a discomfort she refused to name. "Elira," he said slowly, "what's wrong?" She hesitated, eyes dropping. Her hands flexed, then stilled. "It's starting. The heat." She nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "It happens once every few months. My body responds to stimuli, scents, presence, emotions. It heightens everything. My strength. My instincts. My need." He swallowed. The word hovered between them like a match hovering above dry paper. "Is it dangerous?" "To others. It can be. If I lose control. If I don't regulate it." She exhaled slowly. "But I've learned how. Mostly. I don't shift during the peak, too risky. The animal instincts and the hormonal drive combine into something primal." "And to you?" he asked, quieter now. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was fear in it, not for her safety, but for his reaction. "It hurts," she admitted. "The longer I suppress it, the more it burns beneath my skin. My muscles seize. My body heats. I can't sleep. I dream things I can't explain. My senses blur." She paused. "And the hunger." She stopped herself. He didn't push her. But he didn't look away either. "Elira," he said, "what do you need?" She shook her head once. "Not what you think. I don't need sex. I need connection. Grounding. Closeness. Someone I trust near me. It calms the shift." He moved his chair slightly closer. "I'm here," he said. The breath she released was almost a tremor. She looked away, cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with restrained pressure, like heat caged beneath skin. "Julian being here doesn't help," she whispered. "He's made of lies. Cruelty. The scent of him lingers. It agitates me." "Then focus on me," Quinn said, his voice steadier now. "I won't lie to you. I won't run." She rose slowly and crossed the space between them until she knelt beside his chair. Her hand hovered near his, uncertain. "May I?" He nodded. Her fingers found his warm, calloused, trembling faintly, and held them like something precious. She lowered her head slightly, pressing her forehead gently against the back of his hand. The gesture was so intimate, so instinctively vulnerable, that Quinn felt his heart tighten with something unnameable. "I don't understand you," she said into his skin. "You should be afraid of me. You should resent what I am." "I don't," he said, barely louder than breath. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be looked at like a monster. To be avoided. Pitied. Feared." She lifted her head, and her eyes shimmered not with tears, but with a strange softness that bordered on awe. "You see me," she said, as if the realization still surprised her. "I do." They stayed like that, side by side, neither speaking further. The ward light flickered and faded with the coming of true night, and in the stillness that followed, the air grew warmer not from infection or fire, but from something quieter. Something fragile and mutual. Elira curled beside him as the moon rose behind the broken buildings. Her heat radiated in slow pulses, and her breathing evened out, deep and steady. She did not touch him further, but her presence alone was enough to fill the hollow space inside him that had echoed with absence for too long. And Quinn, for the first time in years, let his eyes close not out of exhaustion or defeat, but because someone was watching over him. Chapter 4. Teeth beneath the skin. Morning crept into the hollows like an unwelcome guest, silent, grey, and indifferent to the promises whispered in the dark. The ivy-coated ruins around the bunker caught the light in strange, fractured patterns, casting flickering shadows that writhed across the cracked pavement like old scars waking beneath the skin. Ash drifted through the still air in languid spirals, clinging to surfaces, settling on the remnants of a world that had long since stopped pretending to be alive. Quinn opened his eyes to the familiar stiffness of a knight spent half upright in his chair, the muscles in his shoulders burning and his spine aching with pressure points he couldn't feel below the waist. But more than the pain, it was the weight beside him that anchored him in place, the soft warmth of Elira's body curled near his side, her presence a steady, living pulse against the cold backdrop of the dying world. She hadn't moved in hours, but he could tell she hadn't truly slept. Her breathing had remained too controlled. her posture too alert, even in rest. And now, as the morning light touched her face, he saw the dark crescents beneath her eyes and the tension etched into her jaw. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Elira's eyes opened without surprise. She didn't flinch, didn't stretch, she simply blinked slowly, like a creature used to waking in strange places. "It's worse today," she said after a moment. "The heat's rising." He nodded once. "Anything I can do?" Her hand found his without hesitation, and though her grip was gentle, he felt the tremor just beneath the surface. "Stay close. Speak often. If I start to lose myself, remind me who I am." "I will." A pause lingered between them. Then, reluctantly, she pulled herself away and stood, her movements careful, precise. She didn't speak again until she had moved to the edge of the bunker door and placed her hand against the steel. "The wards have weakened," she murmured. "I can feel the static fading." Quinn wheeled himself forward, stopping just beside her. "You think you can open it?" "I can try. But I'll need time. Focus." She looked at him again. "You'll need to watch my back." He offered her a small, humorless smile. "I'm not going anywhere." But before Elira could begin her work, a voice echoed through the ruins, dry and drawling and too familiar. "I was hoping we'd get a proper reunion this morning," Julian said, emerging from the tree line with his arms spread wide, palms empty. "After all, I brought gifts." Behind him, two figures stepped into view, both armed, both wary, their faces obscured by scavenger masks. One carried a crate stamped with the faded emblem of Mount Vale Outpost, the other bore a radio unit strapped to his chest. Quinn tensed immediately. "What the hell is this?" "A peace offering," Julian replied smoothly. "I figured, if you were going to insist on playing Bunker King, the least I could do was supply the court." He gestured toward the crate. "Food. Water. Ammunition. I also intercepted some chatter on the Ridgegate frequency. Something's moving out there. Big." Elira's stance had shifted, no longer defensive, but not trusting. Her eyes remained locked on the man who shared Quinn's blood but none of his soul. "You expect us to believe you're just here to help?" she asked, voice cold as frost. "I expect you to consider that whatever's inside that bunker might be bigger than all of us," Julian said. "And that your little bond," he glanced pointedly at where Quinn sat, "won't protect you from everything waiting out there." Quinn's jaw tightened. "You're not part of this." "But I could be," Julian offered, tone casual. "I've got resources. Men. Intel. And more importantly, I know how to get results." "You mean manipulation," Quinn said. "Control. The things you're best at." Julian's smile never wavered. "And you're still hiding behind your guilt. The world doesn't care what happened 6 years ago, Quinn. It only cares who survives now." Before Quinn could respond, Elira moved. She stepped directly between the brothers, her body a barrier of sinew and intent. "You're not wanted here," she said simply. Julian's gaze slid to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You always speak for him?" "No," Quinn said sharply, wheeling forward beside her. "But I trust her more than I'll ever trust you." Julian tilted his head, studying them both. Then, with a soft chuckle, he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Suit yourselves," he said. "But I'll be nearby. When you decide you need me, well, you know where to find me." He turned and walked back into the trees, his men following silently. The crate, however, remained. As the echo of his retreat faded, Elira let out a long breath. "He won't stop," she murmured. "He's too invested." "I know," Quinn said, staring at the crate. "But that doesn't mean we use him." "We might not have a choice," she said. "If something really is coming." Quinn didn't reply immediately. Instead, he wheeled himself back to the warded door, staring at the faded glyphs that still shimmered faintly. His thoughts churned, not just with strategy, but with a sensation growing inside him, something cold, sharp, and alien. It had started the moment Julian arrived. A pressure behind his sternum. A pulling sensation beneath his skin. And something else. From the soil beneath his wheels, a single thread of green had begun to twist upward, thin as fishing line, barely visible. It reached toward him like a question. Elira hadn't noticed yet. But Quinn had. Something was waking inside him. And it wanted to grow. Elira pressed her palm to the center of the steel door, the faded ward light flickering faintly beneath her skin like a pulse beneath frosted glass. Her breath slowed as she focused, her body utterly still except for the faint quiver in her fingers where energy met resistance. The barrier was thinning, and every moment she held contact, she felt it unravel, thread by burning thread, like muscle peeling from bone. Quinn watched from a short distance, his chair locked in place, hands resting on the armrests but tense with awareness. The moment Julian disappeared, the air had changed. The plants at the edge of the ruin had stilled, not from wind, but from something stranger, like breath held in anticipation. His gaze drifted back to the tendril of green that had curled upward from the cracked soil beside his wheel. It wasn't just a weed or stray shoot, it moved with purpose. It had followed him. He reached toward it without thinking. The moment his fingertips brushed the delicate stem, a shock rippled up his arm, sharp, cold, and electric. Not pain exactly, but a sensation that penetrated the skin and seemed to twist behind the bones. He jerked back, breathing hard. The vine recoiled, then vanished into the cracked stone. "Quinn," Elira called softly without turning. "Something's wrong." He blinked, the sensation still buzzing faintly beneath his skin. "What is it?" "The wards aren't just passive," she said. "They're reacting to me. Not just resisting, but recognizing me." Quinn moved closer, cautiously, the noise of his rig muffled by the vines that had begun thickening along the wall. "You think it's tied to your past?" Her hand slid down the door, and when she turned to face him, her eyes gleamed brighter than before, too bright. Her pupils had thinned to slits, and sweat glistened along her collarbone, not from exertion, but from something deeper. "I think whoever sealed this place knew exactly what I was," she said. Then she stumbled. It was subtle, barely more than a loss of balance, but Quinn was already moving. He caught her by the elbow, steadying her before she could drop. Her skin was fever-hot beneath his touch, her breath shallow and uneven. "Elira," he said carefully, "you're burning up." "I know," she murmured, jaw clenched. "The cycle's advancing faster than I expected. The stress, your brother, this door, it's pushing me." He guided her gently to the ground, helping her sit with her back against a crumbled pillar. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back, throat arched, teeth clenched against a low groan that vibrated in her chest. "You need to ground yourself," he said. "You told me what to do. Tell me again." She opened her eyes and looked at him. Whatever restraint she'd been holding onto was beginning to slip. There was hunger there now, not lust, not violence, but something rawer and more elemental. Her body was asking to shift. Her instincts were fraying. "I need contact," she said, barely audible. "Pressure. Familiarity. I need your voice to cut through it." Without hesitation, Quinn moved closer, cupping her face in both hands. Her skin felt like it radiated from a furnace, but she didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch with a sharp inhale, as if he'd handed her breath itself. "I'm here," he said quietly. "You're safe. You're not at Netherspire. You're not a weapon. You're Elira Thorne, and you belong to no one but yourself." Her breathing slowed slightly, her gaze locked onto his. "I remember your voice," she said, her lip trembling. "Even before I saw your face. I heard you speak to me when I was still the wolf." Quinn felt something shift in his chest, a pang of wonder laced with sorrow. "I didn't know you were listening." "I was always listening." She reached up slowly and placed her hand over his. Their fingers entwined, not with urgency, but with the fragile intensity of people clinging to the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "I won't." For a few minutes, nothing moved. And then the vines returned. But this time, they did not curl upward with quiet curiosity. They surged from the cracks around the bunker's base, thick, spined, and pulsing with a sickly green light. They writhed toward Elira like serpents drawn to heat. Quinn turned sharply, his body instinctively shielding hers. "I don't understand," he began, but stopped. The sensation returned, stronger this time. A pressure behind his eyes, in his chest, in his fingertips. The vines weren't coming for Elira. They were coming for him. "Elira," he said, breath-catching. "I think it's me." I think they're responding to me. She opened her eyes, and despite the haze of her condition, he saw her realize it at the same time. Gifted, she breathed. I'm not, but he couldn't finish. The vines twisted upward, curling around his wheels, brushing his skin. But they didn't pierce. They didn't strangle. They touched him like memory, like recognition. And in that moment, Quinn felt something split open inside him, not painful, but staggering. A memory not his own. A whisper from roots beneath cities. The knowledge of decay and regrowth, of blood-nourishing seed, of life breaking through rot. He gasped. And the vines obeyed. They retreated from Elira, curling inward, forming a barrier around the two of them. Not to trap, but to protect. Elira reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers trembling. You're part of it, she whispered. The virus, the ecosystem, it didn't just break the world. It changed you too. Quinn stared at his hands, shaking. I think, he said slowly, I'm not just surviving it anymore. He looked at the vines as they shimmered around them like a cradle. I think I'm becoming part of it. Chapter 5. The Roots That Remember. The vines remained long after the tension had passed, coiled gently around the bunker like sentinels carved from the living remnants of an earth long mutated. They didn't pulse now, nor did they stretch toward Elira with hunger or hostility. Instead, they lay dormant in curved arcs and spirals, as though content merely to be near Quinn, as though he were no longer entirely separate from them. Quinn couldn't stop staring at his hands. There were no visible changes, no barked skin or branching veins, no glowing signs of elemental manifestation. And yet, something inside him had shifted. It was more than a sensation, it was an awareness, an attunement that went deeper than thought. He could feel the faint rhythm of the roots beneath the earth, the quiet pull of moisture in the soil, the way living things strained upward even through ruin. He didn't know how he knew this. Only that he did. And it terrified him. Elira sat across from him, her back pressed against the moss-slick pillar where he had steadied her. Her eyes had returned to normal amber, but round and steady, and her fever had begun to abate. Her breath no longer came in pained gasps, though the residual flush across her throat and collarbones lingered like a half-remembered dream. She was watching him now, her expression unreadable, as if trying to decide whether the man before her was still Quinn Mercer or something else entirely. You're not infected, she said at last, her voice quiet but certain. No, he replied. Not like the others. But you're not untouched either. He nodded slowly. Something's been dormant in me since the raid. Since the day Julian ran. She lowered her gaze, not out of shame, but contemplation. I've seen gifted bloom late. Trauma can awaken latent threads. Especially if the body was already marked. Quinn remembered the rubble, the bone-crushing weight, the blood that soaked the ground as he dragged himself from the wreckage of his old life. You think the virus did something to me? I think the world did. She stood, slowly this time, her movements less strained. Her heat cycle had receded into a dull thrum beneath the surface, muted but still present. She no longer vibrated with tension, but her body held a residual alertness, a readiness to act if anything threatened him. What you did, she said, you controlled a living reaction. Not just vines. But a system of mutated biology woven through the ruins. That's not coincidence. That's adaptation. He looked again at the walls, where faint green growth now shimmered faintly in the dimness. So what am I? She approached him, crouched beside his chair, and reached for his hand not in reverence or fear, but in solidarity. You're becoming, she said. Just like me. He met her eyes, and in that moment, the fear inside him began to fracture, not vanish, but change shape. It was no longer a fear of what he might become, but of what others might try to make of him. Power, in a world like this, never stayed unclaimed for long. What if I lose control? He asked. Then I'll bring you back, she said without hesitation. The way you grounded me. A silence followed, rich with unspoken promise. Then the earth beneath them shifted. It wasn't a tremor, not exactly, but a throb. A subterranean ripple that passed through the ground with the weight of buried breath. The vines trembled slightly, and Elira's head snapped toward the bunker's sealed entrance. The wards are gone, she whispered. Quinn turned his chair toward the steel door. Where once glyphs had shimmered with arcane warning, now only faint scorch marks remained, etched into the metal like ancient scars. The heat had drained from the air around it, leaving behind a chill that settled in their bones. Elira rose first, her body alert. "I don't like this," she murmured. It opened too easily. Quinn tightened his fingers on the rig's side lever. "You think it's a trap?" "I think," she said, stepping closer, "someone or something was waiting for us to unlock it." With cautious steps, they approached the door together. Elira reached out, pressed her palm against the cool steel, and pushed. It creaked open, not with the resistance of rust, but with the slowness of something ancient being disturbed. The air that spilled out from within was dry and sterile, tinged faintly with copper and antiseptic. It smelled like memory, like blood scrubbed from stone. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with recessed lights that flickered weakly as though remembering how to glow. Metal walls bore the faint imprint of letters worn nearly to nothing. "Netherspire access level B2. Quinn's heart stuttered. "Netherspire," he said aloud. Elira turned to him, her expression unreadable. "It's not just a lab," she said. "It's where I was born." The weight of that admission lingered like smoke in the air. Without another word, she stepped inside. Quinn followed, the vines at his back curling inward protectively before retreating into the wall. The moment he crossed the threshold, the lights flared brighter, as if recognizing something long forgotten. They descended in silence. Every foot of the corridor felt like peeling back the skin of a wound that had never properly healed. The walls were too clean, the air too still. It was the silence of abandonment, not peace. Then they reached the first chamber. The room was circular, walls lined with sealed tanks, most cracked, some intact, each one bearing the faded insignia of the Thorn Institute. Within the largest pod, a figure floated in murky fluid, hooked to a dozen dormant cables. It was humanoid. And it had Elira's face. Quinn's breath caught. Elira didn't move. "That's not me," she said softly. "It's a failed clone. A replica. Why would they keep it?" "To remind me what I replaced." She stepped forward, her face tight with control, but her voice held a flicker of something raw. "My father built this lab. Not just to study the virus, but to test its compatibility with designed organisms. He didn't just experiment on people. He created them." Quinn stared at the clone, a mockery of the woman beside him, and felt the old anger begin to burn. What kind of man builds life just to break it? Elira didn't answer. Because the question was no longer about her father. It was about what Quinn might become. The silence within the lab was unnatural. It was the kind of quiet not born from peace but from careful design, a sterile stillness meant to isolate, to strip sound from memory and leave only the weight of existence. Even the hum of dormant systems felt subdued, as if the machinery itself mourned what had once taken place here. Quinn remained near the entrance of the chamber, his hands resting tensely on the armrests of his rig. The clone suspended before him, so perfectly resembling Elira, hung like a warning preserved in glass, a parody of life that had never taken its first breath. The pod's fluid shimmered faintly under dim lights, and in it, the mock Elira's body floated in perfect stillness, eyes closed, limbs relaxed as though dreaming of a life she had never lived. Beside him, Elira stood with a kind of stillness that betrayed her unrest. Her arms were loose at her sides, but her jaw had tightened and her nostrils flared with restrained emotion. Quinn saw it in her stance. In the minute trembling of her fingers, she was not calm. She was enduring. "They built her to replace me," she said quietly, as if the air might collapse beneath the weight of truth. "I was a failure in their eyes. Too autonomous. Too volatile. So they made others, copies. Some were altered. Some were controlled with chemical obedience. But none of them survived more than a few weeks." Quinn swallowed hard. "And you did." She turned to him then, and in her gaze he saw a complex storm of anger, sorrow, and something close to pride. "Because I broke out. I tore through the walls of this place and bled my way into the world. My father called me Elira because it sounded beautiful, elegant. But to him, I was never a daughter. I was a design flaw he couldn't discard." Quinn reached for her hand, not to offer comfort in the usual sense, but because there were no words that could ease that kind of knowing. She didn't resist. Her fingers wrapped around his with startling gentleness, and for a moment they shared the kind of silence that doesn't isolate but connects. Your father, Quinn said after a moment, is still alive, isn't he? Yes, she answered. He disappeared after the fall of Ridgegate. Some say he died. Others think he was taken by one of the kings. But I know better. He wouldn't leave his work unfinished. He's somewhere still building monsters. Quinn looked back at the floating figure, then beyond it, toward a corridor half-lit by blinking emergency strips. A faint pulse of green shimmered beneath the steel floor, a thread of vine-like growth that ran ahead into shadow. He recognized it now not as coincidence, but as invitation. The roots are here too, he murmured. Elira followed his gaze. They know you. He nodded, hesitant. They're not sentient, not like we are, but they remember. The soil remembers. It responds to pain, to need, to potential. You speak of it like it's alive. Because I think it is, he replied. Not as one thing, but as a system. A network that spreads through the wreckage of the world, absorbing death and feeding on memory. And now it's connected to me. They moved together into the corridor, deeper into the forgotten arteries of Netherspire. As they descended, the temperature grew colder, the lights dimmer. The walls were lined with records, data slates, half-erased directories, fragmented audio logs crackling faintly through broken speakers. In one room, they found a table stacked with files, each folder marked with a number and a date. Many were illegible from age and water damage. But one folder, still sealed in plastic, bore a name. Project NYX. Elira froze. That was my designation before I chose my name, she said, barely above a whisper. NYX7. Quinn opened the folder carefully. Inside were photographs, grainy, clinical shots of a young girl with silver-white hair, strapped to a gurney, eyes wide with terror. Reports followed, measurements, chemical doses, pain response logs. Diagrams of neurological pathways altered with viral lattices. Notes scrawled in the margin in a precise, emotionless hand. Subject demonstrates unexpected neural resistance. Recommend sensory isolation and genetic reinforcement via Flora integration series. See file, Mercer. Quinn felt the blood drain from his face. Elira, he said slowly. This note, it mentions me. She stepped closer, reading the words over his shoulder. They used you, she said. They used your DNA or your trauma as a baseline for something. For me. Or what came after. He shook his head. But I never volunteered. I was never even near this place. No, she said, tracing the note with a trembling hand. But you were part of a family line. Your parents, do you remember their work? Quinn blinked. Faint memories surfaced, his mother's antiseptic-scented coat, his father's late nights, the way they'd spoken in guarded tones even before the world had ended. Biotech. Advanced ecological studies. They'd worked for the Thorne Institute before they disappeared in the early days of the outbreak. They were researchers, he said. I thought they left. I thought they died in the early riots. They didn't leave, Elira said quietly. They were taken. Just like me. Quinn staggered back, the weight of revelation hitting him harder than any infected's blow ever had. All this time he'd believed his suffering began the day Julian abandoned him, when the building collapsed and his legs were crushed. But the seeds of his fate had been planted long before, buried in the secret work of parents who had never truly protected him. The vines at the edge of the room began to stir again, rising subtly, as though echoing his unrest. I was born of your world, Elira said, stepping in front of him. But you were shaped by mine. Maybe we were never meant to survive alone. He looked at her, his breath shallow, the folder shaking in his hands. We're not alone anymore, he said. And as the chamber lights flickered above them, the roots beneath the floor seemed to listen. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe for more beautiful tales. Tap the next thumbnail to continue your journey.